Hello everyone. Just give me a minute to pull up my slides. And here we go. I hope you all are able to see the screen that I'm sharing right now. Perfect. All right. So, hello everyone, and welcome to my talk, Automation with n8n. Now, in this talk, I am going to help you get started with automating your sensitive data. But before moving forward, I would like to thank the TechUp team to inviting me to talk about automation and n8n. A quick introduction. My name is Harshil Agrawal and I work in the developer relations team at n8n. I have contributed to various open source projects like HPJS, Firefox, and many more. And you can find me on the internet with my handler Harshil1712. So enough of the introduction, let's get started. So, what is automation? So, when you hear the word automation, what comes to your mind? Let's make this an interactive session. So, feel free to share your thoughts in the chat. I would love to know what is automation for you. While you are answering that, let me share my thoughts on automation. So, just like the robot emoji on the slide, when I hear the word automation, I think of robots, of course. But more precisely, I think of a system that does all the work for me. So I don't have to, do my manual work all the time. Mariam says the machines that do my repetitive tasks. John says save time. Exactly. So automation is a kind of a system which allows, which makes the machine do your repetitive tasks. In turn, helps you save time. So according to IBM, automation minimizes the human inputs in a process, hence saving us a lot of time. It allows a system to process without much human intervention. Now, let's take a look at a few use cases of automation. Now, I know most of us over here are developers. So the first example that I took is, of course, around DevOps. Now, being a developer, you might have an automated CI/CD pipeline that's continuous integration, continuous deployment. If you don't, I would highly suggest you to take a look into it because it is going to save you a lot of time and efforts. Because this kind of automation allows you to focus more on developing and adding new features instead of testing it out manually and looking for bugs. Now, this over here is a very small example. But at n8n, we have an automation workflow that allows us to deploy the new version of n8n to either staging or production. So this is a screenshot of the particular output that we get on Mattermost. So if you are not aware about Mattermost, it is similar to Slack, but it's an open source platform. So we use Mattermost. So every time a new version of n8n is out, we get this message on Mattermost. Now, we release a new version of n8n almost every week. So this automation saves our engineers ample amount of time. All they have to do is click on the buttons and the version will be deployed automatically. But it might happen that someone, by mistake, who does not have the right access clicks on that button. So we also added a check for that. So for example, me, if I click on the button, it would give me a message and say that, hey, you don't have the permission. Only these people have the permission. So this is also a preventive measure of not mistakenly deploy a version to either staging or production. So this was about how we use n8n at n8n, of course. There are other use cases as well, which is sales and marketing. And I've come across this use case a lot. Now, these sales and marketing teams, they often have the data spread across various platforms. And trust me, when I say various platforms, it's more than two. And oftentimes they want to sync this data together. Now, such sales and marketing process can be automated, which can save a lot of time as well as improve the efficiency. There are various other use cases where automation can benefit you and your organization, such as you can automate your business operations to optimize them. A lot of our community members use n8n to automate the security workflows. And you can also use automation for your personal tasks. So just this week, I was talking to one of our community members, and I was amazed to see how they are using n8n. They are using n8n not at just work, but personally. So they created an automation workflow which would turn off their CCTV camera at home when they are at home, but it would turn on whenever they leave their house. That was really interesting, an interesting use case of how automation can help. And if you are interested to know how people are using n8n, I suggest you take a look at a blog. Now we took a look at what is automation and we also took a look at different use cases. But there are often privacy concerns when we talk about automation because most of the time when we have our automation pipeline set up, we have this data which is kind of sensitive, right? This can be this data of your clients, their name, their email address, their addresses as well. And we don't want this data to go into the wrong hands. So I would like to know again from you all, what are the privacy concerns that you can think of right now? And where do you think we could, improve this in automation? Or how would you tackle these privacy concerns? Yeah, feel free to post that in the chat. I am continuously monitoring the chat so that I don't miss out any of the messages. In between systems, that's a really good point because a lot of times a lot of our users as well, they have an internal system and which they want to interact with an external system. Now, because it is an internal system, they cannot have an exposed API, right? They cannot make it public. All they want to do is use it internally, which is again one of the concerns that they have. All right, so moving forward, I kind of categorized these concerns into two categories. The first would be the data storage, because this is the first concern that people always come up to me when they are talking about automation. Like, hey, I am using this XYZ thing to automate my tasks, and I'm not sure where the data is stored. So if you are into automation, if you are planning to automate any of your tasks, the questions that you should always ask is, where is the data stored? And the next is, how is it stored? Is it encrypted or not? The next thing you should think about is the access to the data. If it's sensitive data, you don't want anyone to have access to it. So the question then again arises, how would you prevent this? And that's where n8n comes into the picture. To give you a brief introduction about n8n, it is an extendable workflow automation tool where you can add your own custom functions, logics, and apps. So let's say you want to add a functionality or a feature or an integration that is not already present. You can create that and use it in n8n. Because we have a fair code distribution model, we also have the source code available that you can right now just view on our repository. You can navigate to the GitHub repository to view the source code as well as contribute to the project. You can even fork the repository, add your integrations or your functionalities, and self-host n8n on your own servers. If you are concerned about where your data is stored and who has access to it, you are now in control. All your sensitive data now stays on your own servers and it belongs to you. You decide who gets access to what information. Now, before moving forward and going through the n8n repository or giving you a demo of n8n, I would like to bring up two scenarios and showcase you how we build n8n. Because we respect the privacy of our users and it is our utmost concern, when we start planning out new features that benefit our community as well as the product, we want to make sure that we get the inputs from the community. So one of these two features that I'm going to talk about is the new version notification. So this was a major ask from the community because we release again new versions almost every week. It could be difficult for people to know when these new versions are released. So to solve this problem, we implemented a functionality that will ping your n8n instance when a new version is released. And that's a concern, right? You don't want an external service to ping your instance when something is happening in that external service. So the first thing we did is we created a post on our community forum. So you can go to the link that's on the slide and you can check that post. We talked about the solution that we have implemented, and we also asked the community for their feedback to understand what and how they would like to have this feature. After we implemented this feature, and when you start n8n, you always get this output. So I'm just going to leave this for a while over here so that you can read through it. But the main line is line 3, where you can see the environment variable. So if an organization is concerned about getting a ping from us, they can always set it to false. So again, you are in control. You decide if you want to get the notification or not. It's not us who are in control. So this feature is already implemented. So if you start n8n right now, and if you spin up an instance, you will definitely see this message on your screen. Now, the next feature that we are working on is implementing telemetry. Because we don't have currently any kind of analytics on n8n of how our users are using n8n, we are not able to make those product decisions easily. So again, we went to our community. We talked about the problem that we are facing, and we talked about how it is going to benefit not just n8n, but the community as a whole. Because in the end, all the features that we are going to implement is gonna benefit the community. We talked about what kind of information we are planning to collect. You can see that we are interested in getting information on the error codes, on what kind of node people are using, what kind of n8n version they are using. We also talked about what we are not going to collect. So definitely we didn't want to collect any personal information of our users. We also didn't want to collect any credentials because those are very, very important and very crucial. And if those credentials get leaked, we are going to be the one who are going to suffer with the user. So these are a few of the things that we definitely don't want to collect from our users' endpoint. So we talked to our users, we got their feedback, and now we are still working on implementing this. So these are two of the use cases of how we at n8n are focusing on making sure that we are building a product, keeping privacy of our users in mind. Now, moving forward, let's take a look at n8n and create a small workflow. Let me switch to my screen. And over here, what you see is the n8n canvas. Now, as I mentioned, you can self-host n8n, or you can go to n8n.cloud, which is a self-hosted service. Now I am using n8n Cloud for this demo, but if you want to try out, you can simply spin up a Docker container and you can find all that information on a docs. So that's docs.n8n.io. So coming back to this demo, what I'm gonna build right now is a small workflow which would get triggered whenever someone stars my GitHub repository. Now, because I enjoy making small open source projects, I love when people start their project or even create a pull request or an issue. So for one of these projects, I already have a system in place, an automation in place, which sends out a tweet whenever someone starts their project. So I'm going to do something similar with another of my repository. So the first thing we need is to trigger this workflow. And for that, I am going to use the GitHub trigger node. Now, there are again two different kind of nodes in n8n. A trigger node, which would trigger your workflow, and a regular node, which would process all that incoming information from the trigger nodes. Now, the GitHub trigger node has two kind of authentication methods. I'm going to select OAuth 2 because I already have my credentials configured for that. Now, the repository that I am interested is this small Spotify CLI that I created, which gets connected to n8n. And then you can control your Spotify using your CLI. So kind of think of n8n as a middleman over here, interacting with your CLI. So basically passing the information from your CLI to Spotify. So let's fill out the information. Spotify CLI. And the event that I am interested right now is the star. Again, this is a really interesting use case if you are building an open source project. You can thank your contributors if when they open a pull request. You can send them a message like, "Hey, thank you for sending a pull request. I really appreciate that." And just maybe if you want, you can get a feedback from them as well. Okay, so now we have the GitHub trigger in place. I'm gonna save this workflow so that my webhook gets registered. I'm gonna execute the workflow manually right now because I am building the workflow and my workflow is not active. I am gonna star this. So now you see that it has 1 star. If I come to my workflow, it executed successfully, and I have all this information. This is brilliant. Now I have all this information coming in from GitHub. So the next step I want to do is I want to make sure that I am only tweeting when someone is giving a star to my repository. I don't want to tweet when someone, unstars my repository. Oops. Let's get back to that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an if node, which is a core node of n8n. Now in the if node, I am going to select string because the action that is going to come in has a value of data type string. Now, again, we want this value coming in from the previous node because there can be different values coming in, and this becomes a dynamic value. I'm going to click on the gas icon, click on add expression, and now under current node, input data, inside body, let's see action. Yes. So this is what the action that I need. In the result, we can see that this is the action, and over here is the expression that is being used. I want to see if it's equal to created. It should return true. In the true output, it is returning the output from the previous node. That's fantastic. Now what I am going to do is I am going to use the Twitter node because I just want to tweet this out. So I'm going to add the Twitter node. Again, I have my credentials set up. Now, again, because I am using my cloud instance, that is the self-hosted instance, all I have to do is click on connect my account, and this is gonna connect to my Twitter account. But if you are using the if you're self-hosting n8n on your own instance, you would have to create these credentials once, and then you can refer to these credentials in that particular respective node. So let's do Twitter hustle. And in the text, again, I want the information coming in from the previous node. So I'm going to do expression. But this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a combination of some dynamic data as well as the static data. So let's just say thank you, and maybe let's get the username. So I'm going to again get it from the previous node. And let's just see who is the sender. And if we have the login, all right. Hmm. So what I wanted was the Twitter URL, but GitHub does not give us that. So I know a way to do that, but that is going to expand this example. But just to give you an idea, you can make a query to the GitHub's GraphQL endpoint using the GraphQL node in n8n, which will give you the GitHub information, and then sorry, the Twitter information, and then you can use that Twitter handler to tag them on that post. But right now, I'm just gonna use the login. So thank you, Harshit, for starting, and let's just get the repository. Hmm, where is the URL? Let's quickly find that. And Teams URL, tags URL. All right. So what I am thinking of doing is creating a URL by myself, because all the URLs that I have right now, or maybe I found the URL. It's perfect. Awesome. So now you can see over here is we have this dynamic value, and we have some static value, right? So if you go ahead and give a star, not right now, but if you go ahead and give a star in the repo when this workflow is active or is running, you will be able to see the tweet with this with your username and then the repository. So if I execute the node, I get an output. If I go to my Twitter account, and if I see over here, we can see the tweet. Thank you for starting. It should be starting, but yeah, thank you for starting this particular repository, right? So what I'm going to do now is just to show you all how it works in action. I am gonna turn this, execute this one again, and share the link to the repo. So feel free to go ahead and give the repo a star, and we can see it in action. While someone goes ahead and gives a star to that repo, I'm going to take a quick look at the Q&A. Can we use n8n to automate membership registration process? So yes, you can use n8n to automate the member registration process. So that's a good question. So let me quickly show you after this two another code nodes that I often use when there are no nodes for this particular services that you want to use. All right, I don't know if anyone is giving a star to the repo. Just gonna wait again for a couple of seconds to see if someone wants to give a star. All right. Oh, okay, awesome. So someone gave a star to the repo, and we can see the information coming in from GitHub. We can see the sender. Where is the sender? Ah, awesome. So we got a sender, we got a tweet, and it's perfect. So that's running, right? So this was again a small example. Now what I'm going to do is, now my workflow is running, right? But I had to execute it manually so that it get triggered. So I'm going to activate this workflow. So now I don't have to execute it manually again and again. So I'm going to delete these executions. So now if someone gives a start to the repository, my workflow is going to get executed automatically. But here's a small catch. Because this workflow is running now in production, it is running automatically, I cannot see the incoming data in my editor UI. So if you want to see that data in the editor UI, you can always go to the execution list and you would be able to see all those executions. Now, there was an error for a particular workflow on the 18th, which is today, which was right now. That's interesting. So let's open and see. Okay. So someone gave a start to the wrapper, so we can see the information coming in. So let's take a look. All right. This was created again, but there is an error. And it is forbidden because of some reason, because of my credentials. So there, so now I know, okay, so there is some issue with my credentials, so I can go back to my workflow, test it out manually, and based on my test, I can then fix it, and then I can activate my workflow again. So again, this was a small example. I'm going to just turn this off because I don't want to send too many tweets today. But all right. So any questions till now before I jump into the next part? So feel free to ask any questions while I am answering the question by Miriam. So Miriam says that she is using the Google Forms right now. Awesome. So with Google Forms, I'll say this that we are working on Google Sheet trigger node. So Google right now does not have an API, a webhook API, which can be used to trigger whenever a new entry is created. But saying that, if you have a bit of knowledge with JavaScript, you can use AppScript, which is kind of a development platform for these tools by Google. So you can use AppScript. You can write a script in JavaScript. So whenever someone submits a form, that script gets executed, and then you can use the webhook node in n8n to send that information to n8n. So I promise them I'm going to show you two different nodes, two different core nodes, which I often use. So one of them is the webhook node. So now in this case, because we currently don't have a webhook for Google Forms, right? You can hook this up, hook this particular webhook in your Google Forms. You can build that workflow. And once your workflow is built, you can change it to the production URL. So copy this production URL, go again to your app script. Instead of the test URL, replace it with this production URL, and then you're good to go. So if you are using any of these services which don't have uh, a node in n8n, a trigger node in n8n, you can use the webhook node. Again, if you want to, not go, if you don't want to take that part, the other option is to use the concept of pooling. So with pooling, the difference is that you would be making an API call to that particular service at an interval. So you would make a call to that service, you will get the data from that service, you will check if the data that you got is new data or is it the old data. If it's a new data, you proceed forward. If not, you do nothing, right? So I also wrote an article on pooling on a blog, so you can find it again on n8n.io/blog. Yeah, that's another system that you can that's another approach that you can take. Now let's talk about maybe putting out that information in a system which does not have a node in n8n, right? So let's just say you are using a service, let's just call it membership service, right? And we don't have a node in n8n for that. but that service has an API that you can use. So what you can do is you can use the HTTP request node to connect to that particular API. And based on your use case, you can, select the request method. It can be get, post, put, whatever method you want. If that API is using any kind of authentication, you can select what kind of authentication it is. Maybe it's header auth. So you can select header auth. You can then create a new header authentication over here, and then you can, make API calls to that service. Now I am gonna come to the part where, where I'm gonna give a quick overview of how you can create these nodes for yourself. But before jumping into that, again, anyone, any more questions on any kind of automations that you want to build or how you can integrate a particular service? Now is the time to ask. And Miriam, I hope I answered your question. If you still have any questions, just feel free to ask me. HTTP node also allows for bearer. Yes, so HTTP node also allows for bearer. So again, bearer goes into the header auth, right? So you can go to header auth, create new. So most of the times of how I have seen this is the keyword they use is authorization, and then the value is bearer, bearer, and then the token over here, right? Again, if you want to have more than one headers, what you can do is you can add headers in here. But but be cautious if you are adding headers over here. And if you're sharing this workflow, these values are gonna get shared with that particular person that you are sharing that workflow with, right? So make sure, and I always advise this, to use this authentication method, because the authentication data, these credentials, are decoupled from the workflow data. So you can find all your credentials in this credentials option. If I open this, I can see all my credentials. I can edit the credentials over here. I can delete these credentials over here as well, right? So let me quickly try this. So I'm gonna create a new workflow. I don't want to make any changes to this. Yeah, forget changes. And I am gonna import a workflow from a file. Hopefully I have a workflow that I can import. Let's quickly see that. Yeah, I'm gonna open this, and you see, I already had a workflow. I opened it in my n8n instance, and I can use this workflow out of the scratch. Now, because I created this workflow on my own instance and I was using the same credentials, I didn't got an error. But if you are using a workflow which someone else created and it was using their credentials, it would give you an error, and you would have to go in that particular node, set up your own credentials, and only then you would be able to use the node. Okay. All right. So let me quickly go to the poolings blog, and maybe that might help you. Uh, So basically, like, this is how I have been using Google Forms. So when I have a Google Form, I always connect it with a Google Sheet, right? And with pooling, what you can do is you can make a request to your Google Sheet, right? Maybe every 5 minutes or every hour, get that data from Google Sheets. You use a function which filters out this new information, and based on the output of this function node, the next nodes in the workflow get executed. So over here, what is happening is it's sending a message on Mattermost, but what you can do is you can again use an HTTP request node to set up, to send and to add them to that particular platform. Okay, so currently the rough process is Google Forms, add members to Google Groups, and then send notification email. Ah, that's interesting. Now, I'll be honest, I haven't used Google Groups, but I am sure they have an API. So maybe you can take a look at that API and see how you can connect it. But I'm just gonna quickly make a note of this and see, uh, try to see how Google Groups work and if they have an API for this. All right. So that's all for the small demo that I wanted to show you, and I wanted to show you how you can create workflows with n8n. If you have more questions, feel free to ask me. I'm gonna move on to the next part, which is gonna be around contributing to the project. Now, as mentioned earlier, you can contribute by you can do code contribution since the source code is publicly available. And I really enjoy this, using nodes that are contributed by our community members. So let's just say you want to create a node for a hypothetical membership service platform, right? So you can go ahead and contribute the code. You can help the community by answering questions on the community forum and get engaged over there. You can always contribute on the documentation. So if you find out like some information is missing, which can be really helpful, a documentation is again publicly available, so you can always contribute to that. And there are a lot of ways that you can contribute to the project, but I know because I believe most of us over here are developers, so I'm going to talk more about how you can contribute via code. All right. So the repository over here on GitHub is public. So let me share the link there so that you can open it on your screen as well. So over here, it is kind of a very big repository and we have a lot of things going on. So I'm going to walk you through the repository. And if you are interested in contributing a node or improving a particular node, where you should go. So all the code basically of n8n lives under the packages directory, and then it's in node base. Now there are a lot of things: CLI, code, design system. We are working on design system, which would make it easy for our embedded partners to have to use n8n to kind of implement that in their own system. And then the editor UI. So if you want to make any changes to the editor UI, that's where you can go. Node Dev is again a project which allows you to create this nodes for n8n. And this is where all the nodes live, which is nodes base. Now in nodes base, there are two important directories which you should be focusing on. The first is the credentials, and the next is the nodes. So any service that you use would definitely have a credential unless it's a public API, right? So this credentials, the information of this credentials and the code for that lives in the credentials directory. And the rest of the code for that node lives in the nodes directory, right? Let's go to nodes. Now again, you can see that there are a lot of nodes already in n8n. There are around right now 300 plus nodes. And each of these nodes mainly have their own folder because these folders contain all the required code for that. So I am just gonna quickly find ShangGrid because that's one of the node that I created. So over here in ShangGrid, you can see there are again a lot of things happening, right? So what I'm gonna go do is I'm gonna quickly walk you through all the code. It might be a bit overwhelming. If you have any questions at any point, just feel free to ask me. So the main code lies in the node.ts file. Now, all this is written in TypeScript. Now, I wasn't someone who was so proficient in TypeScript, but I learned it through the process because I was already into JavaScript, so I knew how JavaScript works, and this kind of helped me to transition into TypeScript. So don't worry if you're not into TypeScript or if you don't know TypeScript. If you know JavaScript, that's more than enough to get started. So we are using all these default values or this default how do you call this types that we have created from to use. These are the default values that you can always include. The description over here, the list description, the contact description, and the mail description. These basically define the fields for that particular resource. Let's take a look at that in a while. Now, this is the main function, or this is the main class where everything is happening. So this function or this class basically defines how a node looks. So you see there is a display name, there is the icon, there is the subtitle, the colors, the credentials that this node should use, and all the properties that this node has. Now let's take a look at SendGrid and try to map this information. Let's go and create a new one. So the first things first, you see that there is the name which we saw in the display name. And if I open this again, there is a description as well. And below over here, it shows which resource and which operation I'm using. So talking about resource, so this is an endpoint, right? Which is, think of this as an umbrella endpoint. So over here, the resource is a list. And within list, there are various operations. This can be creating a new list in SendGrid, or maybe deleting a list or getting that information of that list, right? Similar for contact. So this resource is kind of an umbrella, and within that, we have various operations for that particular resource. Going back to the code, you see that we have, again, a field with, to display the resources, and then a field to display the operations. Now, I have extracted this information to a different file, and this is what I'm doing over here. So I'm calling that information in this particular lines of code. Okay, now moving forward, because I am using SendGrid and there can be a lot of there can be different lists in SendGrid. What I'm doing is I want to fetch that list coming in from SendGrid. So all the user has to do is they have to select that particular list. They don't necessarily have to pass on the ID of the list. So over here, the load functions basically they are fetching this information from SendGrid and making it easy for the user to simply select it from the drop-down menu. And in this execute function, I am calling all this information. So first what I'm doing is I'm checking which is the resource that the user has selected, which is the operation that they are using. And then based on that, I am making a call to that API. So this SendGrid API, I created this in another file. That's the generic file, which I'll go to in a while. But I'm passing again all that information and then simply displaying the data out there. So if I select my personal account and maybe get all contacts, I hope I have some contacts in there. All right, so looks like I don't have any contacts. Maybe in here. Okay. So unfortunately, I don't have any contacts in my list, in my account. Okay, but I have a list. It's wonderful. So you can see that the information that we are getting in from the list resource, we are displaying it out to the user. And this is where n8n becomes more flexible, because if you see, we are not just giving the name or the ID, but we are giving them all the information that is that we get from the API, right? So whatever information this particular endpoint got from the API, that is getting displayed and getting returned to the user. So if the user wants to use that particular information in that workflow, they can simply select that information and then build their workflow. All right. So now going into one of those descriptions, let's take a look at the list description file. So again, this is again a simple array which contains the object operation. And in that, I have various options like create, delete, get, and get all. And now for each of these operations, right, there might be other fields. For example, in get all, there are two other fields that are return all and then the limit. So quickly see in get all. So over here now I have specified, this is the field that I want to return. This is the type, and this should be returned for the resource list and only for the operation get all. And the same I'm doing is for the limit operation, sorry, the limit field, right? So display it where for the resource list only for the operation get all and hide it when the return all is true. Oh, sorry. Show it when the return all is false. So if I turn this to true, gets that gets hidden and is not used. If I turn it to false, only then limit is displayed. So that's what you do basically in these description files. Again, this is a more preferred way of creating the nodes and extracting out those lists because it makes it easy to make changes. But you can always uh, have all this information in the node.ts file itself. So now to quickly give you a sneak peek at the generic function file. So in the generic function, we are exporting the API call. We are telling, what kind of information it is expecting. We are getting again the credential information over here. And then we are making the API calls. So again, the node.ts file gets the information from the UI. It passes on the body or the query parameters to this particular function over here, and this function gets executed and returns all that information to the user. Okay, I know I talked a lot about these files and showed you a lot of information. And this can be overwhelming, so I'm going to take a small pause over here to see if anyone has any questions around what I have shown till now. Also, I will be at the booth, the n8n booth, so feel free to drop off anytime over there to ask any questions that you around this. And I see answers for the Google form question. Thank you for answering that. And yes, we are working on the Google trigger nodes, which I would be honest is a bit complicated than expected because again, Google does not have a webhook support yet. So we are working on, getting finding out a good implementation, a good method of how we can implement that. Again, feel free, folks, if you have any questions, just ask me right now. Okay, gonna move forward to just quickly show you how you can contribute to documentation. So not a developer. That's completely fine. Even if you're not a developer, let me share the secret with you. I didn't code any of this from scratch. What I did was I copy pasted the code from other nodes because a lot of these things are very same for almost all these nodes. So I found a node which is similar to the SendGrid node, copied it, made a few changes, and done. And that's how I created the SendGrid node. And let me quickly show you the documentation. So we have created a small tutorial to help you get started on creating your own node. So again, in this documentation, we have specified all the requirements on how you can get started. We have given a lot of information, which I have just given you an overview. But again, go you can go through the documentation, copy and paste it, make some changes. So you see over here, it's friend grid. If you're using again, if we are working on the membership platform, right? You can simply change the name this to membership platform, make a few changes over here as well, run it, and you can see the output for your membership node, right? So it's kind of not a difficult process, but again, I would say just give it a try and see how it works. So how could non-developers use n8n easily? That's a really good question. So let's come back to the editor UI, right? So what I talked till now was how you can contribute to the project via code. But if you are not a developer, you don't need to be a developer to use n8n, right? So let's just say you are not a developer and you want to use n8n. All you have to do is, get started with n8n, create an instance, or if you want to use, you can just sign up for n8n Cloud, and then you can select whichever node you want. Let's just say, for example, over here we want the Google Sheets node, right? I can select the Google Sheets node. I can select what kind of authentication I want. Again, I'm going to go with OAuth 2 because I'm on cloud. So I can, simply click on sign in with Google, and I can easily sign in with my Google account. Since I already have an account, I'm going to select that. Now over here, you see, because I am reading some information from a sheet, it's asking me for a sheet ID. Now, not sure what this means, so I can, hover over that and I can see some information. That's good. So I know how I can get a sheet ID. But again, if you're not sure, we have a documentation for this. So you can go to the documentation of that particular node, right? Read a bit about how we are getting this information, how we are doing a particular operation for Google Sheets. So because we want to get a sheet ID, I can see, okay, so it's copying a string of characters between these particular things, right? So it's slash d and this added, get that ID, paste it in here, execute it, and that's it. And that's how you can how you can get started with using n8n, even if you're not a developer. And thank you for watching for a documentation. I'm really glad that you are finding it useful. And the other place I would suggest you to take a look at is our community forum, because our community forum, as you can see, is really active. If you have any concerns or if you have any questions around building your workflow or getting started, you can always post your question on the forum. And you can see someone posted a question on the forum. Ricardo answered that question, and that now Jan is online. He is also interacting it. So Jan is again the founder of n8n, so you can always find him answering questions and helping the community as well. So again, if you have questions, community forum is the best place to ask them. And I see that I have only 5 more minutes. So I'm going to quickly go through the documentation repo, which is quite straightforward, but to help people know how it works. So the documentation repo lives again in the n8n organization, and it is n8n-docs. And then the most of the documentation lives on the docs. So over here we have various sections. So there is courses. So we a couple of months back we released n8n course, a level 1 course, where you can learn about n8n, go through the course, take a quiz, And if you pass the quiz and complete the course, you get a certificate. I it's not related to the contribution, but I always brag about this because I built this. So I have created a lot of automation workflows which does the whole processing for us. So whenever you sign up for the course, you get an email that's automated. Your course score is automated, and even the certification generation part is automated. All right. So getting started contains all the information which you might need when you're just starting with n8n. And if you are creating a node and if you want to share documentation for that particular node, this is where it would go. So under nodes, nodes library, based on what kind of node it is, whether it's a trigger node, a regular node, or a core node. So again, the if node, the webhook node, these nodes which are core and which are not tied up to a particular service, these are the nodes that go into the core nodes, and then there are the regular nodes, right? You can then go ahead and create documentation for that. And yes, we are having a community meetup on the 8th of October. So I would suggest you sign up to that because, as Sean mentioned, it's a really good. It's worth attending because you get to listen to you get to listen stories from the community members, as well as we also share product updates with our community, share what we are building and what we are going to release next. And there are a lot of technical content that we also do. So if you want to have your own n8n instance, and if you are scaling that, and if you want to learn how to do that, we also do some lightning talks around that. So you can always take a look at that and learn about it. I'm going to quickly get the link for the meetup. So if you all want, you can join in here as well. All right. 2 minutes. I think I have 2 minutes. So I am open to any kind of questions that you people might have, or any feedback or anything that you want to share with me. Awesome. I'm looking forward to hosting you there. All right. So don't see any questions coming in. So thank you everyone for joining in and for listening to me. I will be around at the booth. So feel free to come to the booth, interact with me if you want. If you have any questions around n8n or automation in general, I would be happy to talk with you. Also, if you are planning to contribute to the project, feel free to hit me up. Again, I'm gonna be at the booth for a while, or you can always post the questions on our community forum, or you can shoot me a message on Twitter. FYI, I don't have access to internet, so I may not be really active over there, but community forum is the best place because even if I'm offline, the team is out there. All right. So thank you, everyone. I hope this was helpful, and I am looking forward to helping you out with your automation journey. Thank you, and have a nice day.